Hi, this is James, and you're listening to Downtempo Life. I'm very excited if you've decided to join me today. I'm hoping to cover a subject that would be useful for you and the things that you may be going through today, tomorrow, whatever is lying ahead in your life. And the question I'm going to ask today is, are you self-aware? This podcast is really all about taking a look at who we are, how we think, and the goal is nurturing a calmer, clearer, more connected version of ourselves. I think I do this largely out of my own experience of trying to find my way through life. It's been an interesting journey of feeling lost, feeling like I knew who I was, feeling like I had no idea who I was. It was like this unending journey of ups and downs. And in a way, that's probably our story, all of us, in some manner of speaking. And self-awareness is an interesting subject because I think I largely saw myself as a very self-aware person. I spent a lot of time thinking. I mean, I'm one of those people who's just forever in their own mind, and I'm introverted, so that's my natural tendency to be quiet and reflective. And while everyone's chit-chatting in the room, I'm the one people watching and gauging my own perceptions and creating my own story, sometimes it feels like, and trying to see if I was intuitive enough to really understand what I was seeing or thinking I was seeing. And it's been a game that I've played in observation of other people, but also in observation of myself. And so the question of, are you self-aware, is something that I find interesting. Now, what's very interesting is there was a group called the Eurich Group, and they've done extensive research on this aspect of human psychology, the way that people perceive self-awareness and whether they're actually self-aware. And their studies over a long period of time was they found that somewhere, I think they said around 95% of people would describe themselves as being self-aware. It's a very high number. But based on the criteria of what they describe as self-awareness, their research indicated that only 10 to 15% of all people qualified as being self-aware. Now, their criteria was described by two categories of awareness, those being internal and external awareness. So this would consist of virtues such as our own values, our passions, our aspirations, our reactions to things, our strengths, our weaknesses, how we fit within our environment and the things around us, and the impact that we have on other people. And further to that, overall, how we believe that other people view us according to all these previously mentioned values. So we have a view of ourselves with all of these virtues, and then we have also an external picture of how we think other people perceive us. Now, while many people cite their propensity to introspection as being an evidence of their self-awareness, and I think that's why a lot of people, they think to themselves, they think, well, I'm always examining my thoughts. I'm very aware of my feelings and my emotions. When I feel mad, I examine why I felt mad, and, whatever that narrative is that you tell yourself. And there are people who definitely have a propensity to introspection. I'm one of those people. In that sense, I would qualify myself as one of the 95% who is like, oh yeah, I'm self-aware. But the truth is, and they found this, is that introspection or introspective activity, it doesn't correlate to our level of self-awareness. And the reason is that we don't often have access to the depth of our own unconscious thoughts and feelings and motives. So we're behaving in a certain way, we're doing certain things, we're acting out, we're having emotional reactions to things. And then when we go and we self-assess, we come up with our reasons why. But the reason we're doing these things in the first place and behaving in certain ways or getting caught in in mental loops is because we can't access that level of unconscious thought and feeling and motive. So we do tend to default to asking why questions to understand ourselves, like why we are the way we are. And why questions, speaking for myself, I always thought of that as being like the gold standard. You need to get into the why. And I do think there's a place for that, and I'll talk about that a little later. But why questions are not objective questions. And what we do is we begin answering those why questions with inventions of our thought. We invent answers that feel good, that feel true. The answers we give to the why questions are subject to our existing biases and our false and negative narratives that we always are caught thinking about. And so we drift easily into denials of what might be true. We get into rationalizations or justifications or overestimations of how we see ourselves based on how we want to see ourselves. And so when we're answering why questions in our mode of self-awareness, we're still very subject to our own impressions. And so that's why it's very subjective thought. It is definitely interesting because I know for myself, I was always way more interested in answering the why questions. Like, why am I like this? Feels way more insightful. The problem with why questions, it isn't that they're always wrong. In fact, we might be onto something when we're answering the why. But we can also become very overconfident about our feelings without questioning the validity of them, where they're coming from, what they're based on. Think about how differently it is to ask a what question versus the why question. So let's go back to this why question of, well, why am I the kind of person that I am? The alternative what question would be, what kind of person am I? So the why question is very subjective. It's my feeling about why it is that I do the things that I do. The what question is very objective. It's a question that if you were to pose to a loving, caring person in your life and you were to ask them, what kind of person am I? And if that person could offer a viewpoint of what they see of you without going into the subjectives of why, then what you're going to get is a very honest answer. You don't communicate very well and you're very kind-hearted, but you also tend to do such and this and that. Whatever those answers are, I don't know. That's the kind of thing that you would find out if you were to ask, what kind of person am I? Or even if you were to ask yourself. And that's a hard one. And this is the thing about self-awareness too, is if you really care to be self-aware, you're not going to play some strange game. Like, just look at it for what it actually is. And you can go into what questions of all kinds. What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? So what triggered my insecurity today? What did I feel when those things happened to me? What can I do to handle this situation better? Or even externally, like what was it that I said to make them so upset? What did I do to make them feel like I wasn't listening? So when you're exploring yourself, you want to begin to see the picture of yourself in the most clear, honest, unbiased way possible. Because from there, you begin to reap the benefits of self-awareness. And if you were to look at the benefits of what self-awareness is, it's like the ability to influence outcomes, the ability to communicate with clarity and with intention, the ability to understand yourself and others more clearly, a freedom from your own biases and assumptions and negative self-talk, more regulation of emotions and stress, a feeling of deeper connection with yourself and with others and your relationships that you have on an everyday basis. So ultimately, what I do think is that what questions will lead to why questions. What the what questions do, though, is they provide you with the right pieces to work with when you do start asking the why. if you're not looking for what happened, very clear, to get a very clear picture of like what it was that took place, what it was that happened in that moment to cause an emotion. What were the triggers? What were my actual thoughts? What were my actual feelings? And then you can begin to take the what answers that you get and you can begin to explore more about the why. But you'll be using accurate information then in that sense. Speaking from some experience of asking what questions, and this was something that was very interesting. It goes back to my days when I was pastoring. And I was doing a whole lot of counseling at the time. And one of the practices that I did in order to kind of put the finger on a part of the people I was sitting with and have them access a certain level of awareness that they previously maybe never explored was to ask a series of what questions. And it was done through a questionnaire. I would hand them a sheet. It was full of emotional words of all kinds, things that would be, I would call, loaded with feeling and memory. I would ask them to write down a number between, say, 0 and 10. 10 being intensity of feeling, and 0 being none at all. And I was just asking, what does this word make you feel? So they would be words like abandoned, accused, all my fault, alone, always wrong, anger, anxious, neglected, misunderstood, mistreated, manipulated, not cherished, blamed, can't do anything right, pressured, pathetic, overwhelmed, defeated, degraded, sad, scared, devalued, don't belong, suffocated, embarrassed, and so on. You get the idea. So I was just asking, what does this word make you feel? That what question comes loaded with a lot of feeling. And that's an example of like what questions can be extremely powerful in making you A, feel something, and B, it can really put a spotlight on something that if you're honest and if there's an honest reaction, you can really highlight there's something here. And when you follow the path of where the answers are for these what questions, then you start getting into the why. Then you start really getting into the meat of what self-awareness and self-reflection can produce through intense self-discovery. Without getting too personal, I sat with one particular individual and I watched him go through this questionnaire. He's a very private kind of personality. He didn't share a lot of his own emotion, and he was actually very disconnected from his emotional self. When I would ask him how he's feeling and different things of that nature, he couldn't express it very often. But when I asked him what these words made him feel and he began writing it down, it took a long time for him to write down a number beside each of the words. There's a lot of them, so it takes a little bit of time. But as I'm watching him, I'm seeing emotion begin to come over his face. That's what I mean, where if you begin asking the right questions, then the self-awareness becomes very evident. He couldn't hide how he was feeling when he was asked to answer these things honestly. What did this make you feel? If I were to describe his level of self-awareness prior to some of these exercises, I would say it was very low. Asking the right questions can really bring to the forefront what's really going on inside, and that's the crux of what self-awareness can do. It's the introduction to yourself. It's reconnecting yourself to a part inside of you that needs to come to light. And now with that awareness, you begin going into those places and asking even harder questions. And healing can begin to take place when you're that self-aware that you can begin speaking to the reality of what's going on inside of the inside. I think we can access those parts of ourselves through practice. It's something that doesn't come innately and easily. It's actual work. It is the work that sometimes takes years of digging inside, of self-exploring, of sitting with somebody who can unlock parts of you that need to be unlocked. And until you do that work, it's hard to access the why and the things that are unconsciously going on inside of you. With the practice, you can then begin to recognize patterns of feeling and thought, and you can kind of go to the source. But that can take a while, and a lot of people don't learn how to go about doing that, and so they default to usual practices, to having an idea of what self-awareness is, but maybe not being able to really get down to an awareness of what's really going on. So what I've gathered from, the things that I've been reading about and the things that I'm reflecting on myself is that we have a lack of self-awareness when we get locked into a fixed mind loop. We get reflective and introspective around our existing narratives. If our sense of awareness is rooted in an existing mindset, without really seeking to learn and to challenge and to understand our own blind spots, so that we can grow out of our mental framework and things that hinder us as they are, then self-awareness is something that we may not really have a grip on. It's just a thought to question ourselves as to the level of self-awareness. And I would say this, just speaking of my own perception of myself, is that I've always thought myself of being very self-aware. But for sure, there's things in my life and the patterns of my thought that are very fixed. And I remind myself of them because they are comfortable and they're familiar. And that's the story that I've been telling myself for years. And what I really should do is to begin to examine those loops that I'm in. And maybe there's a different story. So what is that story? What is it that's influencing my thought? What are the factors at play? Maybe there's more what questions I could find about what's actually happening. And then I can get into more robust whys. Why am I doing this? It's a different way of thinking, or maybe it's a way that you're already aware of, and you're already well on your way to enlightened self-awareness, and that's wonderful if you are. But this is just a questioning, inquisitive, curious kind of podcast episode where just throwing it out there. And in your own time of reflection, think about it. Think about the way that your mind processes things, and are you self-aware or as self-aware as you say you are? I think that's a good question to ask yourself too. I hope this is helpful in some way. Thanks for listening. My name is James, and this is Downtempo Life.